Welcome to Pre-Shift, tidbits of wisdom for everyday service. My name is TJ Griffin and I'm the corporate wine educator for Winebow. We encourage your questions at any point during the webinar, but please use the Q&A rather than the chat bar. Let me introduce your host. Master Sommelier Ron Edwards is the husband of one wife and the father of 5 girls, as well as a surfer and a missionary kid. He has almost 30 years of hospitality experience, and since 2018, he has been the director of wine education for Winebow. And now, here to discuss today's topic, 3 summer reds, Master Sommelier Ron Edwards.
Good morning, TJ. Good morning, everybody. Nice to be back. Hopefully everybody had a really fun and eventful, in all the right ways, holiday weekend. I know that our family did a bunch of different fun things. How about you, TJ?
Yeah, we had a cookout with some friends of ours. It was an indoor cookout because it was rainy on Sunday.
Yeah, we had a lot of saw a lot of family gatherings yesterday. We were up in Shenandoah National Park, and a lot of family gatherings there. And I saw some traveling on Sunday as we were going up there to camp. But we had our we kind of divided. It was a little unusual for us. My daughter and I went camping as a duo, and other people did other things. And then we got back together yesterday. So it was good. It was good to be outside and enjoy nature and kick off summer. Although I will tell you, camping Sunday night in Shenandoah at 3,200 feet, we were in the clouds and it was cold. It was not summer that day.
Partake of any summer reds?
I did, but not the one here. I actually took with me a Castellare from Chocopaya from Lisboa, part of Portugal, which was fun with bratwurst and potatoes on the open fire and all that stuff. It was delightful. It was fun. All right, so you don't hear this necessarily at my house, but we hear it in a lot of houses. I know TJ's preference is red wine, right, TJ?
It is, yeah. I'm a red guy.
And I think that is kind of a normal thing. My life in restaurants in the United States would definitely indicate that the first preference when people think they're going to have a nice evening is, I don't know, it's probably 70% red wine is associated with that currently. That trend may have changed a bit since I got out of restaurants, but that was the norm. And it didn't seem to matter what time of year it was. And so instead of fighting my guests on the idea that they want to drink red wine, I would always come up with ways to help them drink red wine and still keep them in the season and with the menus that are typical this time of year and going forward through the summer, and see how that worked out instead of just saying, no, you should be drinking white wine, which we should never tell people what they should be drinking. We just need to give them options that make sense for them based on what they've told us so far. So summer doesn't change the personal preference really of very many people. Some people are seasonal beverage consumers. Maybe they drink whiskeys in the winter and they drink lighter styles of beer in the summer, or they drink wine in the summer, but they tend towards rosés and whites. And then when the weather changes and it gets cool outside, they embrace red again. I wouldn't really think that would be the normal everyday wine consumer. I would say that's probably somebody that, while we love entertaining them, is a little bit of an outlier. TJ, you think that's an outlier in today's market?
Yeah, I think people tend to have their preferences and stick with them.
It's so much easier to be comfortable with what you are that already gives you pleasure and stay with it, right? Than to experiment and be disappointed, especially if you're out at a restaurant where you won't necessarily feel like you have a second chance at a bottle of wine. Summer also involves that dining change, right? Most fine dining restaurants surely tend to have seasonal menus, especially in today's marketplace with the emphasis on local sourcing and using more sustainable food sources, et cetera. You tend to be ordering and buying things that are seasonal. So the things that end up on your menu are lighter, more summer, more driven by vegetables, more fish, etc., perhaps, than you would see in the wintertime, where you'd start to see heavier items like braised items on the menu and things like that, which, wintertime dining styles are more suited to red wine in general. but it's not exclusively so. I mean, the Mediterranean diet, for instance, of the things that most Mediterranean people groups ate year round, work pretty well with red wine year round. Where the compromise has to be found is between the heat of summer and the pleasure of red wine. And so let's sort of explore three short options on finding the compromise between the warm weather of summer that makes you just naturally wish for lighter things and the guest's preference for the pleasure of red wine. I think this is especially true if we're dining al fresco, where you're actually impacted by the warmth of the summer, as opposed to, going from air conditioning home to air conditioned car to air conditioned restaurant facility. You may not really feel the impact of summer so much, and maybe your eating and drinking preference isn't as altered as it would be if you spend a fair amount of time outside or are actually physically eating outside. TJ, you do feel different perhaps if you're dining al fresco than if you're eating in an air conditioned restaurant?
Yeah, I think that can be a factor. I'm not as big a fan of al fresco dining as probably a lot of people.
What is it that turns you off? Is it swatting at bugs, or is it the noise, or enemy? I mean, you live in New Jersey, so dining al fresco for you is a different meaning than some other people, right?
Well, it's either too hot or too cold or too windy or too buggy or too muggy, something.
Well,
too many factors out of my control.
Okay. Yes. So, all right. So it boils down to factors out of your control. It seems personality issues have emerged. All right. So three, the number three. Three is a really good number to just do in a lot of things. And I forgive me for oversimplifying this whole thing into three things that I think are really the secret to making people happy that they ordered red wine, making the food happy that red wine's on the table, and making, and suiting the weather that we're approaching or already in the middle of, depending on where you live. And so the first thing I think, and perhaps the number one thing actually, is the overall acidity of the wine, the tartness, the refreshing nature. So looking for red wines for summertime menus that have those pH ranges in that 3.3 through 3.7 is a great goal, as opposed to all these red wines that are 3.8 to 4.0, because those wines don't really feel refreshing once they get past that 3.7 range much, and they also tend to have a lot more alcohol in them, because that's the reason they don't have much in the way of acidity. They're much riper, much more impactful to the body, and when we consume higher alcohol beverages in the summertime, it makes us sweat more because it just raises your body temperature. And so thinking along those lines is really great. The other thing is the overall weight of the wine. So our foods are lighter. Just the feeling of lighter beverages is sort of a natural thing when warm weather approaches or is upon us. And so the overall weight of the wine really matters. If I really like velvety, heavily textured wines, taking a step back from that is probably not going to alienate me in the dining setting and would be much kinder to the rest of the experience if we're trying to combine, personal preference with seasonal need, if the guest is open to that. Some people just aren't open to the suggestion, and they're going to order what they're going to order, and that's fine. And those are not the people that we're addressing in this webinar as professionals. We're looking for the people who look at us and ask for a suggestion or seem to be open to a conversation about what they should consume off of your menu. And then the last, of course, and this is always true perhaps, but it's definitely true in the summertime, is overall food friendliness. Because if we're going to have dishes that are lighter, we're going to have lighter weight proteins on plates, we're going to have more vegetables on plates, we're going to have that feeling of taking a whole layer of texture and weight away from most summer dishes, then the wine in front of us needs to be more friendly towards food. If it's really myopic in the fact that it just has to have a big slab of beef and the dish being presented is mostly vegetables, then that wine's not going to have a very good time on the table. And although the personal preference of the guest may embrace the wine on its own, if we're looking for something that's more holistic and complete, it won't really flatter what's on the table. So those three factors are why I'm coming up with the next three suggestions in wine. TJ, you good with us so far? Any added points that I haven't thought of so far?
Well, I tend to, and this is just, I think goes back to food and wine pairing too. The trying to say it non-pejorative way, the lavish use of new oak can, for me, take away. I tend to associate that with cooler weather, colder weather, heartier dishes, that kind of thing. Is that a personal thing for me, or would you agree with that?
Well, everything in wine is a personal thing for most of us.
Sure.
So in that regard, we can always say that. I think that the lavish use of oak tends to go along with wines that have a lot of texture and have a very specific place in the wine market. And I often think of them as warmer feeling, richer feeling, cool climate intended, sort of, or cool weather intended, not cool climate intended. So I think I would agree with you there. And I think it kind of goes along with the idea that overall weight in wine, as the weight goes up,
right,
you're probably intensifying impact on me, which makes it the wine in a warm day, drinking an impactful wine feels hot to me. I don't know if I can even explain that, other than it just gives me a feeling of being hotter rather than being refreshed.
Yeah. Okay.
So that's why I say avoid weight. And I think that your comment about oak falls right in there, because it does add weight and texture, if nothing else. And it does add other things as well. So, okay, here we go. Let wine number one. The number one, not the number one top selling, not the number one, just the first one I thought of for summer red. And this one won't be a surprise to any of you. And so if you're looking for 3 wines you've never heard of today, while I probably could have done that, I chose 2 wines you definitely heard of that are easy access for guests and could be very successful for you in sales. And then 1 wine that you may not be paying attention to, and depending on who you are, may not have even heard of. So, so we're doing the 2/3, 1/3 rule, TJ. And the first one is Beaujolais. Beaujolais is not just for summer, but it is an absolutely perfect summertime wine for many, many reasons. Beaujolais is 100% Gamay. And what's important to know about Beaujolais is that Beaujolais Nouveau and the production methods of Beaujolais are not uniform. Beaujolais Nouveau is a very specific thing. That's not even made the same way by everybody. But this idea that they're bubblegum, fruit forward, simple wines is not true across the board, especially when you get into the crus. But what is becoming more standard, if not well into the majority, is the idea that these wines, save for a few famous producers, tend to be fermented the same way that their expensive neighbors north do the Pinot Noir. And so it's a different grape, but it's classic Burgundian, some whole cluster, some not, fermented at cooler temperatures, fermented to make wines of substance and elegance and age-worthiness, especially in some of the bigger crus. And quite honestly, in youth, they're sometimes very difficult to tell the difference between something from Pinot Noir made out of a different area of Burgundy and one of these crus of Beaujolais. So TJ, anything you want to add there to the reality of Beaujolais is not what a lot of people think it is because of the popularity of a couple of particular styles, or the idea that many, if not the majority of these wines are made by traditional red wine techniques?
Yeah, well, I think that's absolutely right. I think for a while there, Cru Beaujolais was having a big moment, and it seemed to have dropped off a little bit. But I think it's worth exploring. That whole middle ground too. It doesn't have to be a Cru, and neither does it have to be a Beaujolais Nouveau. There's really just great Beaujolais at the village level.
Yep.
Beaujolais Village, fantastic stuff.
I agree, and very, very value oriented, especially at the Beaujolais Village level. Those wines are remarkably affordable for the quality that you're getting. A lot of these wines are blends of really old vineyards, and they just don't fall into one of the 10 crus, and so they can't ask for the same price tag And so when you fall into one of the crus, it's like, wow, what would you pay for a Premier Cru or a Ludi even, which isn't a Premier Cru red Burgundy, compared to a good bottle, a really good bottle of Cru Beaujolais? It's like half the price, even on the restaurant list.
Yeah, tremendous value.
And you get a lot of pleasure out of these wines, and they're tremendous with summertime. And, you know, the main reason they're tremendous with summertime is they are intense without being heavy. They're refreshing. They're still good at cellar temperature, so you can drink this red wine with a little chill on it. So it's really great for alfresco dining, TJ, except for you, because, you know, that's not your thing. But for me, having it on a little bit of chill and sitting out under a patio is really ideal for this kind of red wine. It's super flexible with food because it doesn't carry a ton of tannin, but it has a little, and it's really got this wonderful moderate level pH in the way of wine. So, you know, that 3-5 range where it's really refreshing and it feels really red fruit tart, kind of like fresh berries. And, you know, it has that noticeable side along with this sort of remarkable affordability for the quality range. And so here are two on the screen, shameless suggestions from Winebow. Both of these we import. And, you know, these are wines you can find on menus, depending on the restaurant markup and the market itself, for a lot less than regular Burgundy made out of Pinot Noir. I shouldn't say regular, than Burgundy made out of Pinot Noir, and probably less than most of your favorite appellations of Pinot Noir from the West Coast or similar, but for just the estate bottling, not one of their single vineyards. And both of these are single vineyard, highly controlled and beautiful spots. Brie and Morgon are two of the great vineyard sites for Beaujolais. And both of these wines definitely, in my opinion, over deliver on the experience to price comparison. DJ, any input here on these?
I love these wines, but I wanted to ask you a question about serving temperature because aside from the fact that red wines, you know, should all be served not room temperature unless your room's in the 60s, but but that's not what I mean or I think what you mean when you say serve it with a chill. It's actually a little cooler than that. Do all red wines are all red wines able to take a chill, or is it only certain red wines?
I think it's only certain red wines. If you take a tannin forward red wine and you pull it down below, say 62, 63 degrees, what happens is it becomes really edgy and attacking and loses its fruit profile to balance out the tannin. But if you take a wine that's got a real nice pop of tartness and moderate to lower levels of acidity, you can bring that wine down to a lower temperature, and the fruit profile will stay there because of the acidity. Sort of like the inverse with white wine, right? If you let a white wine warm up, it feels less tart and maybe less refreshing, but you gain other flavors. And in the case of red wine, the wines will feel more tart or edgy depending on the tannin level, and you will lose some of the fruit flavor as it chills down. But in the case of Beaujolais and wines like it, the fruit flavor that you really want to pop in the summertime is that tart red berry flavor or red cherry flavor in the case of Chianti, for instance. And that is actually a good thing in that 60-degree range. Now, these two wines, drinking them straight out of the cellar, you know, traditional cellar temperature of 55 might be a smidge cool, but that 58 to 61 degree range is really magic for these wines, which is well below what you get if you just order a bottle in most restaurants and it comes off the rack hanging on the wall in the dining room, which is that wine's going to be somewhere in the 75 to 80 degrees, depending on whether it's sitting behind the bar or underneath a bunch of lights or whatever.
That makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's move on to the next two, or the next wine. All right, so the second summer red, number 2. TJ, you got a drum roll for me, you know?
I'll try. Here we go.
Nice. All right. So the winner is Chianti Classico. That is super high quality Sangiovese. And I'm not including all of Chianti here. because I think in our world of hospitality and what we're trying to sell people, I think we're better off selling them Chianti Classico as a dining experience, as something that feels a little more special, and also from our perspective as something we feel like we can control the expectation a little bit more. Because one of the biggest reasons that Chianti Classico is not fully appreciated is, well, Chianti has the same DOCG level quality designation, but it's really, really large. I mean, it covers like almost all of Tuscany, and it has an enormously broad range of price and quality expectations. TJ, what's the least expensive Chianti that you've bought retail? So labeled.
Just Chianti?
Just plain old Chianti.
Oh, probably like $11.99.
Yeah, and well, you know, if you're a Trader Joe's shopper, or maybe you shop at Aldi or Lidl, you can pick up a Chianti so labeled for $5.
Yeah.
Okay, wait a minute. And then you're bringing them in the restaurant and you're asking them, you're telling them, hey, Chianti would be a great suggestion for them. And they're going, I don't want a $5 wine on Friday or whatever. So Chianti Classico tends to be, even in Trader Joe's, that wine's in the low teens or right at $10, which everybody knows in Trader Joe's, it's like half the price of what you would pay for a similar wine somewhere else, just by nature of the way they create their selections. But
well, it's kind of like the cruise with Beaujolais, you know, Chianti Classico, you know, you get up to the Reserva and the Gran Selezione, you can have the best wines of the region for a fraction of the price of say the, you know, the best wines of Burgundy or Bordeaux, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. And even less than just Brunello, right? Which is just down the street, just out of popularity and scarcity. Right. And so, you know, this idea that Chianti is often priced at $9.99 to, you know, $14.99, throwing Aldi and Trader Joe's and all that out, that's a confusing thing for the customer to think, wow, am I actually getting a quality bottle of wine from you? But when we get into Classico, at least the pricing standard has gone up a smidge, if not a bit, quite a bit. And I feel like over the last 20 years, especially, they've really tried inside the Classico designation to try and eliminate some of this really low-lying question to their reputation, because, you know, everybody's value is based on what's the lowest price in your area, right? So if we talk about Chianti Classico, we can focus their attention and we can talk very specifically about the idea that this is the heart of the region. This is this elevated rocky hills, heart of the terrain, the original Chianti, you know, not with disrespect to the rest of the really well-made wines that are outside the Chianti Classico line, but, you know, we can actually craft a story here that's very specific when we're trying to convince our guests. And, you know, why Chianti Classico in the summer? I think it's pretty straightforward. These wines have such beautiful elevated tartness, very similar to what we see in Beaujolais. They have this beautiful tart cherry, cranberry note. Sometimes it's dried cranberry, but always refreshing. Even when they're big and age-worthy, they're still refreshing. When we go with just basic Chianti, that's the wrong word. When we stay with the Chianti Classico designation, TJ, and not getting into Riserva or Gran Selezione, because we don't want these wines to see a lot of oak aging or raising of the intensity, because we're trying to stick with summer. Yeah, I see you want to have what do you want to say, TJ? Jump in.
No, I was nodding my head.
Okay.
Agreeing. Yes.
Very good. And so the reason I want to stay with the Classico designation without the extras is I want to keep the tannin levels reasonable for summertime. And when you get into Riserva and Gran Selezione, you're definitely going to elevate the substance of the wine and make it a bigger, bolder experience. So that way we still have in the Classico designation, we still have the tannin and weight that can compete with a steak off the grill or, you know, prime rib in a restaurant or whatever. But it also really highlights other foods, general Mediterranean fare of tomatoes and olives and garlic and vegetables aplenty. And, you know, it will work with fish. You know, Chianti Classico is actually quite good with certain fish. You need a little bit of substance to the fish. I wouldn't have it with flounder necessarily, or maybe halibut, but something slightly more oily is quite delicious with salmon, for instance. Then your you're going to have a magic for 4 people sitting at a table having a bunch of different foods. Chianti Classico is a really nice compromise when they want to drink red. Texturally, these wines feel lighter. They don't have that rich coating feel of a wine meant for a fire and a good book. They have that sort of, they feel like they're lifting you rather than sedating you. And, I think emotionally, Chianti Classico just feels happy and free and like summer. And the other great thing about Chianti Classico is saying the word "this is from Tuscany" will generally evoke an image in every guest's mind because they've all seen a movie or a group of pictures or something about the rolling hillsides of Tuscany and the really elegant, houses up on the top of the hills and the groves of olives, and it just feels happy and summery. TJ, do you get that sort of picture when somebody says the word Tuscany to you?
Absolutely. It's always it's always summer in Tuscany as far as I know it's not, but when I think of Tuscany, I don't think of snow. I don't think of rain. I just think of warm sun, and that's a place I would dine al fresco.
Now you're talking. Yes. And it is beautiful to eat outside in Tuscany. And I think that most people have that reaction to the idea of Tuscany. And so this is a super easy introduction. The other thing is, most people who drink wine in the United States have heard the words Chianti and maybe even Chianti Classico. So this is not something you're trying to throw at them that they're like, no, I've never heard of that. I'm not interested. Even people who traditionally drink, all New World wine, most of them have either had a Chianti or at least seen the label when they were shopping for other wines, which really helps the conversation because it doesn't feel as foreign as it might be otherwise. And, here's some shameless suggestions with a little bit of stylistic indications. So Castellare is a wonderful producer in that more elegant, lighter style. Some people would maybe talk about it being traditional, but there's not a whole lot of traditional when we think of what was going on in Tuscany 80 years ago, wine being made now. What you will find in these wines is especially in the Classico bottling, you won't notice new oak. You'll notice fruit forward, but savory, a lot of savory notes in the Castellare. It's really great with food for that reason. And I love it in the summertime. Castello De Bosi is another one of our producers. This wine comes from a slightly warmer part of Tuscany, of Chianti Classico, and the wines reflect that. They've got a little bit more weight, a little bit deeper color, a little bit richer fruit profile. And some might say, and they use a little bit more oak because of that, meaning newer oak, because they have the stuffings in the wine to do it. Someone might say this tastes a little more modern, but I think fleshy is the better interpretation. TJ, any comments so far on these two wines?
No, I love them both. They're so definitely Chianti Classico, but within that range, they're so different.
Yes.
It shows just a little bit of the diversity, and when you add the third one in, it really shows the diversity of Chianti Classico as a region.
Yeah, and speaking of the third one, Pojos Galette is really wonderful, and it sort of fits between these two. So you have the bookends of style in Castello De Bosi and Castellare, and then when you get to Pojos Galette, now you're dealing with a wine that's kind of in the middle. It has some of the fruit forwardness of Bosi. It has some of the reserved elegance of Castellare. What's interesting, though, about the Scalette wines is when you open them, because of the way this gentleman ferments Sangiovese, you're going to swear that he's blended something else in, Merlot or Cab or something, to get the more purple color. But he doesn't. He just has a very specific method that he follows in the specific temperatures of fermentation at the beginning that allow him to keep a darker color in his Sangiovese than his neighbors. It still tastes like Sangiovese. You just look at it and go, oh, he's blended in some Merlot, but he didn't. It's really, really great wine, and you should definitely find these three producers. Invite 7 people over to your house, get all 3, and try them side by side. What do you think about that, TJ?
Are you inviting me?
Sure. Drive on down. Let's do it. All right. So let's see here. Third Summer Red. I love this picture. It fits really well with the wine we're about to bring up. So we've had two very comfortable wines, easy to introduce to your guests. They've heard of both of them. You might have to tell a new story for Beaujolais. You might have to augment the story for Chianti. So now you're going to talk to one of your guests that trusts you a little bit more, has had interactions with you that gave them confidence that, you know, you're not going to lead them astray, and they want you to introduce them something new. And so the third region is Chiro. Yes, Chiro. And people are like, what? And wait till you hear the grape. If you didn't know, Chiro is 80% minimum Gaglioppo. That's Gaglioppo, Gaglioppo, Gaglioppo. Sounds like definitely something from an Italian children's story, perhaps, like the giant of Gaglioppo and his kindness towards children. But it's really this delightful red wine grape that has been grown in the area for a very long time. Interestingly, Chiro is on a part of Italy that feels very remote to the rest of what we think of as Italy, but has been a major trading area and shipping area in that side, that red circle there, for millennia. And so there's some really amazing history down there, as well as old grape varieties that don't need to be taken out. They don't need to be replaced by things from the modern world. They need to be embraced. And Chiro is one of the regions that does that. So just to the south of Chiro is the historic, meaning thousands of years of operation, port of Cortone, including the 9th century castle fortress that still stands there and guards the harbor, at least in visual now, even though it's not physically guarding the harbor anymore. And there's the ability to put 20% of other local varieties. And when you start dealing with Italy and its other local varieties, TJ's, the list can get really, shall we say, esoteric, or at least unheard of.
Yes. And then you find out that the 19 grapes you just learned are all the same grape and they're just different.
Yeah, it's just different names for a similar grape, or 3 variations on the same grape. There's always that. And when you're getting Chiro, you can just get regular Chiro. There's actually a Chiro Bianco, which is mainly based on Greco, as in Greco di Tufo. But the red and the Rosato are based on Gaglioppo, and you can buy it in regular Rosso. You can buy a Superiore, and you can buy a Superiore Riserva. And in this case, the Superiore indicates a higher than minimum, a different minimum alcohol by volume potential at harvest. And you're like, well, wait a minute. It's Mediterranean climate. It's right there on the water. They shouldn't even have to worry about a minimum alcohol requirement. But what's fascinating, is it the grape variety genetically? Is it the way they grow the grapes? Is it actually cooler than we think? Because we always think it's always summer in Italy, and it's not. But these wines are actually very balanced. The wine I'm going to show you, it tops out at 13.5% alcohol, carries a pH of 3.7, right there, basking and bathed in the Mediterranean sunshine. It definitely gets the influence of the Mediterranean maritime influence. Not exactly a cold sea, but certainly it's going to moderate the temperature there. But I think it's very interesting that these ancient grapes of the Mediterranean often give you these really well-balanced red wines that are capable of giving you that in such sun-bathed environments. TJ, you got anything to add there on the unusual nature of finding, a 13.5% alcohol wine in basically grown on the beach?
Yeah, it is. It's seemingly contradictory, because this is the Mediterranean. Look it up, the definition of Mediterranean climate. And you'd think they'd be hot and out of balance, but they are not. They're refreshing and tart and just perfect.
I think some of this becomes culture, and some of it is the nature of the grape, right? Because we see a similar thing in our Greek red wines. There are very few Greek red wines that I've had that I would say aren't refreshing. I think it's a choice, and I also think it's grape variety. So I think when we look at Italian food, it just tastes better with a little tartness, right? And Italian culture is wrapped around the idea of food and wine together. So it seems very natural to me that their wines would be very good with food, and their food would be very good with wine, because I think they see it as all one holistic concept. That, I mean, even in the saying that you haven't had too much to drink, you haven't had enough to eat, it just sort of translates that culture straight into the idea of, well, of course you're feeling a little over the limit because you haven't had, another round of pasta or whatever. You haven't listened to the grandma tell you to eat more, to balance that out. So here's the shameless suggestion for Chiro, and honestly, a great suggestion whether we imported it or not. One of the leaders in the area for a very, very long time, Librandi, and this is a picture of their traditional Rosso bottling. TJ, when's the last time you had one of the Librandi Chiro wines? Not
It's been too long.
but
I love these wines. And you're absolutely right. You can buy, they are the top producer of Calabria, especially of Chiro. And you can buy these for very, very little money. They're great values. And I know we're talking about red wines, but I do have to give a shout out to the Rosato as well, which is 100% Gallioppo. Delicious.
Yeah, it is really, really awesome. And rosé obviously is a great compromise for people in the summertime who want to drink red wine. But I don't think it hits people the same way. I mean, people who are thinking about a red wine experience, while they may enjoy the rosé, I don't think they walk away fulfilled. How do you feel about that, TJ?
Yeah, no, I agree. When you want a red wine, you need a red wine.
Yeah. I always tried to talk, well, I didn't always. There was a point in time where I said, I'm going to work hard to move people from red wine to rosé in the summer, because it makes sense with the food in front of them, and it makes sense with my own goals. And I quickly got off of that because I realized that was my goal. It had nothing to do with them, and I needed to get off of my goal and get onto theirs, which was to have red wine. And to be honest, it didn't fit with the financial goals of the restaurant either, because there aren't very many quote unquote expensive rosés. There's a few, and there are lots and lots of expensive red wines that my clients wanted to drink, that I should stop standing in the way of financial progress and just find better suggestions for them for the summer. So that's kind of what this is about as well.
So Barb commented that she just had a bottle of Chiro last week, and in case you were not sure, it was spectacular.
Thank you, Barb. And I'm glad you got a hold of that, because it is delightful. And, I just feel so lucky and blessed to have access to the Winebow Imports portfolio, along with all the other wines we have. There are so many really great wines to explore inside our portfolio, and we have most of everything covered. There's some stuff that we don't have because it's almost impossible to have the whole world, but man, we've got great Burgundy, we've got great Tuscany, great Piedmont. We got the rest of Italy covered fairly nicely, including Librandi. We have Greece, we have Spain covered pretty much around the rim of Spain. We have Portuguese wine. We got the greatest producer in South America, probably in Catena, between all of their levels. And then we have great Chilean wine, and we have outstanding New Zealand and Australia. I mean, it's daunting at times. And you look at it and think, wow, really? And the answer is yes, we really do.
So that brings up a question or a point. So we were in the old world today.
Yep.
Does the new world make summer reds?
Absolutely. And I think we lean on them heavily for Pinot Noir in the summertime, because people like it. It's a very popular wine, and selling Pinot Noir from the New World is the easy button for sure, and a good choice. I mean, when you start looking at the price of West Coast U.S. Pinot Noir, it's also a money-making proposition for the restaurant and hotels. So I definitely wouldn't stand in the way, but I wanted to bring something to the table today that you might not have immediately thought of, because they aren't necessarily the easy buttons. Beaujolais takes a little more work for sure than Pinot Noir. Chianti Classico is a slightly different conversation than you normally have with a guest, probably. And then Chiro is like, wow, nobody ever asked me for a Chiro. No, people don't ask for Chiro. You just have to have it available and then show it to them.
Yeah, if you pour someone a taste of the Chiro, and 9 times out of 10, they're going to go, okay, I'll take that.
Yep. I remember the friend that introduced me to Lebrandi Ciro the first time. I'm still grateful to him for that. And that was a long time ago. And it was great. And he was in a Southern Italian research mode. And I think he had added Salice Salentino and Ciro to his wine list at the same time. And so within short order, I tasted both for the first time, because that's what friends are for, right, TJ?
Good friends, yeah.
Yes.
Friends you keep.
He was a good friend, and he was crazy about Italian wines. And I think he still is, even though he's moved on from restaurant work to wholesale now. So
what's next, Ron?
What's next is we're going to have the pleasure of having Madeline Truffaut, Master Sommelier, and my professional mentor on the broadcast in 2 weeks to talk about something that's very near and dear to her heart, that she tried very hard to impress upon me on a regular basis. And that was the idea of, she always put it, because we were in hospitality, restaurant specific, meeting the guest on their terms. But I think on a broader sense, we're talking about meeting the client, because if you're listening to this webinar and you work in the wholesale trade, you can apply this exact same principle to the buyer that you're entertaining, or the buyer's employees that you're entertaining. And we need to meet them on their terms. We're talking about, sometimes we talk about meeting people halfway to create that compromise or that relationship. Madeline believes you have to meet them 100% the way. You can't expect them to come to you at all.
That sounds very interesting and very applicable to lots of things in life, right?
I think so. I think it's super applicable to good salesmanship, because when you meet a guest or a client on their terms instead of yours, it's pretty clear that you have their interest in mind, that you've moved beyond like give and take to I'm just going to give and we'll see where it goes. And it'll be fun to converse with her about it, because this won't be about wine facts and heavy memorization or any of that stuff. This is going to be two people speaking from the heart. So spread the word amongst your friends and neighbors, get them on the email list, send it out to your clients. When you get the email, send it to other people. Please do forward the pre-shift invitations to any and everybody you wish. If they sign up, they'll get in on our email list soon enough, and then you won't have to forward it.
Find out about everything. And today's June 1st, Ron, so that means there are 5 Tuesdays this month.
Yes.
5 opportunities this month to join us every Tuesday at 11 a.m., alternating from pre-shift to the Bordeaux show. And we hope to see you there. And yes, absolutely tell all your friends, all your family to join us every Tuesday, 11 a.m., same bat time, same bat channel, as they say.